Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I just want to quickly say that last week, some of you asked how you can switch off the beeping sound when people are asking questions. And the way you do it is inside this hip chat video. If you go to the settings at the bottom, okay, and you see there's a option which says notify me by playing a sound. You want to have that unchecked. And you save the settings. And now when people ask questions, you won't get the beep sound every time. Okay. Hope you enjoy the lecture. Good luck. Bye.
Thank you, Louis.
There you go.
Thank you. Did we close the window with the thing on it? It doesn't matter.
This is the way you have the questions.
It's just I wanted to see us the camera.
Okay.
Oh, still there?
Yeah, it's still there.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's fine.
only problem is there's sound there. So what we could do is switch off the sound, yeah? So you can see how you look.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Louis.
All right.
Okay.
Just remember there's a 60-second delay.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Hi, guys. That's us again. Okay. Can I just please ask you, after that point that Louis explained about the beeps, if someone during the lecture asks the same question, can one of you please answer them? Because I'll probably be, in the middle of the lecture with Steve and everything, and I might not be able to answer them. So if someone later on asks about that beep, please answer them. All right? Just write in the chat. I'm hoping that you all have the chat open on the side and you can see our screen. As usual, there's a 1-minute delay. Okay? So, but I mean, you won't notice it. All right? Okay, so we'll just wait for a couple of minutes until everybody logs in, and then we'll start, okay?
Do you mean I'm that slow?
Oh, it's just a medium. Do you hear me, guys? Did you hear the things that we were saying? Guys, can you just confirm that you can hear me? Oh, sure. Okay, good. Okay, okay, guys, I'll just repeat quickly about the beeps. At the bottom of the chat window, you should find a settings button. If you open it, inside it, you will find notify me by playing a sound. Unclick that, just that. Notify me by playing a sound, just unclick it. Okay, great. Okay, so this will contain all the chat and the questions, so we'll have to be selecting or read them and see which ones are the questions and which ones aren't.
Okay.
Will we get our breeze back?
We should get it over the weekend. I hope so. And just open up the chat.
Is there a minute delay on speech as well?
Okay, it's all together. And we turn it. Okay, let's just yeah.
So do we just speak as normal, or say a slide for and then wait a minute, or
No. Just because let me just get it a minute later. That's all. Okay, guys, we're gonna start. So we're gonna start like last time. Steve will start by talking about evaluating integration between models and some other related issues, and then I will follow on with a couple of issues about managing the technical part of the project setup at the beginning. All right. Yeah.
Good to be fun, isn't it? Hello, everybody. Very odd circumstances today. I know I'm slow, but I'm not slow by about a minute. Anyway, today we'll look at some aspects of management and project setup, and you can see the things that I intend to cover in some shape and form. Might not be what's always expected when you see some of these headings, but then that's part of my job, to make you think and think differently. Some of this material today perhaps will seem quite simple to some of you. To some of you, it might be a first start. And at the other end of the spectrum, when we look at volumes and database systems, we'll delve a little bit into IFCs, the high tech end of what we talk about in, or a high tech end of what we talk about in BIM. So here we go for today. Now, I showed something similar to this before, and it's something that you're all familiar with, and having to integrate a picture like that is incredibly difficult. This is something we did just the turn of the century. We had a government-sponsored program called Teamwork, where we took the Royal Institute of British Architects main hall in London, Portland Place, and facilitated teams in BIM working. And this was a typical map of the software platforms that were in use and the data exchange mechanisms between systems. You obviously see the variety of software platforms, but what people don't often see, and certainly directors and managers who are setting up projects and costing projects and putting in fee bids with projects, don't see the behind the scenes activity that goes on to make these systems work properly together. And that's where there is a lot of hidden cost in these sort of exchanges, ISC exchanges, .3ds, VRML, ASCII exchanges, all kinds of things going on there, a collaborative portal using the Graphisoft development language. An absolute nightmare, really, in trying to get things together. And I suppose in some respects we've got to integrate the team and get people to converge as much as possible on a common project view. And a lot of what you'll hear on this course is all about getting people to cooperate and work in the best interest of the project, and get people to realize that working in the best interest of the project is their best interest too. And they've got to come to the project table with a slightly different attitude. Certainly on this course, BIM, information management, better information management, we've got to have a consistent information view within the project team. And finally, most important of all, perhaps, is a consistent and common view of processes for all kinds of things, setting up information and reviewing information, checking quality of information, and so on. So we've got to get people to converge on some of these important routes into a BIM landscape. And to help us, we've mentioned these things already, and Merv mentioned CPICs.
Yes, but it's want to be explained in more detail.
Okay. There are these documents, CPICs documents, which are out there, and I think that they're on the Moodle website.
Yes, all of these documents.
All of these documents are. And these documents attempt to be a first step in getting people to converge on a common path. They ask simple questions. Are you prepared to issue your native CAD formats? If not, why not? And we ought to. Do you work to a CAD BIM standard? If not, why not? And all sorts of questions like that. And I sort of urge you to look at these documents. They are useful. They are sort of supporting, in my view, to not the primary documents necessarily, but they are good supporting documents for employers' information requirements and a BIM execution plan. But those things help us to help us to converge on a common route. And something very, very similar here, simple here. I'm starting at a very, very, very elementary and simple place, but very often ignored. And this says the IR should include spatial coordination, common origins for buildings, and so on. And going back to another government project that Merv and I were on, the Avanti project, slightly different then. In some respects, I'm pleased to say it's slightly different at that time, because it was harder. There is a little more, what shall I say, formality in getting people to adopt BIM these days. Perhaps sometimes a little misguided by procurers, sometimes not what we would like it to be from procurers, but nevertheless a little more formality. But at that time, Merv and I had to sort of facilitate project teams to move them forward gently from the place in BIM where they happened to be at that time. And here's a very, very, very simple example of thinking about how can information fit together better. Is that a question?
I'm trying to see.
Okay.
They were asking me, there was no Revit in the last slide.
Oh, no Revit. Goodness me, no.
There were others, so we're just wondering.
Yes. A very simple thing here. If you look across the top there, we've got common origins for building, multiple buildings, positive measurements, conventions about grid labeling. And we look at each individual company and say, yeah, a red square there means that company A, for example, has a policy, a BIM policy, on its origins. Company B and Company C don't. Moving to the right there, Company B has a policy on individual building origins within a job, but companies A and C don't. So as you can see, some simple metrics, if you like, on where those three companies are at the moment. And on the bottom, at the bottom there, you can see what we scored. Actual scores are 6 out of possible 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 or so. My bar should be up to there. But we're moving people along, and our target is to fill in those red circles so that everybody converges on these first 4 things on the left-hand side. And that sometimes can be all you might expect to achieve, because very often people are entrenched in the ways, in the processes, and very often resist change, which is one of the biggest sort of barriers in BIM, really. And I took the view that just to ease people along with gentle targets was better than trying to bash them over the head with everything all at once. Similar thing here. How accurate is your information? On the left-hand side there, we've got accuracy of computer drafting. Are people using associative dimensioning? That is, the elements they put into the model are accurate, dimensionally accurate, and the dimension lines that they input are actually connected to the extremities of a particular element or the openings in a particular element, and they are true and accurate. People haven't been eyeballing dimensions in to a different dimension that the model contains. Are we using a full-size model? 1-to-1, that's pretty common now these days. It wasn't at one time. Dimensions taken from the underlying model. If we're putting things in accurately, we ought to be able to take dimensions accurately from that model. And we'll see a little bit of an example of that later on when we look at the Summerfield Shops experience. And now we're all using common units, meters, centimeters, millimeters. And I guess perhaps there are people out there in the States probably using feet and inches, and some people here in the UK were still using feet and inches, even though we've been metric since mid-70s. So again, we're looking what company A, B and C have got in terms of policies. Red squares are what they've got. Red circles are what we'd like to achieve. So we've got an actual there on the bottom, and that's our target. Moving people along gently, and so on, and on we go. Same sort of principle here with folder structure naming, file structure naming, and file contents naming. In other words, who's got a CAD standard, who hasn't, and again, red squares show who's got something. Red circles are people who don't have anything, and again, actuals and target. And this sort of says companies with working in a common data environment, edging towards a common data environment. If we've got companies all with totally different standards and unwilling to give way on those standards, so we've got a completely disparate team.
There's one question.
That's you. You just asked me a question.
No, it's from Mohammed. The collaborative nature of BIM makes the risk shared. What do we have to do regarding that? Well, we're going to talk more about risk later, a lot more about risk.
Yes, you'll get a lot more about that, Mohammed, in the coming weeks. I'm not going to address risk specifically today, but be assured we will cover it very thoroughly indeed.
And one thing as well about risk being shared, it is not always shared, Mohammed. This is recommended, of course, and we will talk about different procurement systems that where the ones that allow or ask for sharing of risk and those which do not advocate it.
Okay. Important set of investigate.
Another one before we go on, sorry. Another one from Chema. In my projects, MEP people use millimeters, architectural information people use meters.
Yes, Chema.
Are we doing something incorrectly?
Yes, you're using different units. this is exactly what I'm saying, Chema. And I mean, in some respects, using these CPICS documents and going through this kind of exercise, even if people don't want to change for various reasons, and they're usually silly reasons, even if people don't want to change, at least you know what they're doing. You've got that basis, and if you've got that basis, you can plan for it. It's not. I'll say this many times. Even if people aren't agreeing, if you know what you're disagreeing on, then it can be managed. It's suboptimal, but it is, in my view, still a little step forward in knowing what each other is doing. Back to the slide. Important piece of investigation here. What sort of definitions have you got for the roles for the people you can see across the top there? All three companies have a role for project manager, but probably when you dig down into the documentation within each company, then the roles will probably have some differences in any case. But nevertheless, for the sake of this exercise at this kind of level, we'll say they've got a role definition for the project manager. Same thing again. Who's got what? Red squares are what they've got. Red circles are what we're aiming for. Okay, so that's a very, very gentle approach in some ways, and the principles behind that can be multiplied across all kinds of fronts, contractual fronts, insurance fronts, risk sharing fronts, somebody's already mentioned. But that kind of approach in saying, what have you got? Let's have a look. Let's see how we can converge on a common approach. But surely using meters makes more sense for fuels, for example. Yes, Andy. I mean, we all have our sort of pet reasons why we'd use meters or millimeters or whatever it might be. And I don't mind what they are, what the pet reasons are, provided that we can get some agreement on the project for one consistent set of units.
The problem is always with the integration, Andy. When you come to, well, in the federated models, when you come to put them on top of each other, there could be problems because of the difference in the metric system, even if it's both meters and millimeters.
Yeah, that's true. True. Join your factory. To know how. Okay, coming on to database systems now. Quick overview of database systems and some of the concepts behind database systems. Here we've got a flat database, what's called a flat database. Excel is a typical example. Taking at its simplest, yes, you can write macros and so on. You can write some C++ behind the scenes and so on to make things work slightly differently. But at its base, it is simply columns and rows of information. Having said that, of course, Excel does give some power, and you can achieve quite a lot with an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I've already said that an Excel spreadsheet and a 2D graphic system make a reasonable, modest BIM database environment. And here's our old friend Kobe, which you'll hear quite a lot of. It makes use of the flat database, although it says it's a subset of the IFC model, which is a far more sophisticated form of database, which I shall come on to in a few minutes. In a structural office, we use millimeters for flat dice and millimeters load. Why not? Why? No idea. Exactly. What's the rationale? Next sort of level up is the relational database, where we sort of seek to store information once and once only, but attach it to other bits of information to form sort of a compound piece of information. And you'll see the little connections there, the one-to-many connections represented by the one of the infinity sign, where we can sort of string product IDs, order IDs, suppliers and purchasers together, and just save the minimum, absolute minimum of data about each topic there. Moving on, certainly in sophistication, and I gave a sort of glimpse of this at the induction day, and this will probably be a recurring theme a little bit throughout. Object databases are what can and should be used more and more these days. Remember my working concept of an object. It's all information or all behavior. In other words, it does something. Remember that analogy with the word processor and the paragraph. Paragraph containing information about its style, its font, its color, and so on, and its relationships with the page and how it behaves when you hit certain icons. Tom Holder-Mark's done some normalization on relational databases out there. Well done, Tom. Yes, quite right. Normalization, you can take various views of how things get normalized, but there we are. That's another question. The BIM model contains rich information like specification components, who we can protect the IP for designer, and who the owner can use the information without being IP broken. Can we cover that somewhere? We'll be doing Mohammed, again, Mohammed, you're jumping the gun a lot here today, aren't you? We'll be covering IP again when I talk about contracts and insurances and so on. That's not the idea today, if you bear with us. But again, I can assure you we will be covering IP in quite a lot of depth. You'll not only have me talking about it, Noha will, and you'll have quite a few other people coming in from the UK industry and the legal side of the UK industry to talk to you about IP. So forgive me again if I just leave that on one side for today. Object technology, as I said previously, incredibly important. You don't shift today without using object technology in some form. It's embedded everywhere. Transportation, white goods, social media, certainly. It's everywhere. In your cars, no matter what you do, you'll be using object technology. And here we've got a very, very simple working idea of an object-orientated database. And just delving a little deeper into objects, we say objects, but you've got to remember that object in software engineering, as Auntie Noha will tell you, is a particular thing, and the basic sort of definition of an object is simply it's an instance of a class. And we kind of use objects, the word object, a little bit loosely, certainly in construction. The software engineering world probably wouldn't like the way we use the word object, but nevertheless, here's just some working concepts again. An object is an instance of a class, and a class is a group of things that display similar characteristics and behaviors. So really, it's the class that determines what an object is and what it does. And in that diagram there, you can see the black thing is a class name. So that class name might be simply doors. And the door has characteristics and it behaves. So when we place a door, when we place a particular instance of that class, in other words, an object, that object gets data. And we might say characteristic 1 is its fire rating, characteristic 2 is its finish. It behaves, so it moves with the wall, and it has relationship so that it knows that it doesn't clash with a column. So that's object 1. Object 2 only has characteristic 2. It's not a fire door, we just know it's finished. It moves with the wall and no clash with a column. Chat this, okay, let's just general chat, I think. We think Noha, yeah. Object 3 has a characteristic, so it might have a fire rating, it has a finish, and its only behavior is that it doesn't want to clash with a column. It doesn't move with the wall. It's not as clever as objects 1 and object 2. So again, simple working concept of an object-oriented data. Of course, it gets far more complicated than that. But if you just think about those working ideas, that'll do for the time being. Delving very deep here, some people talk to me about IFCs. You get Nick Nesbitt and I, who are probably the few people who've actually manufactured IFCs in the UK. Did actually start before Nick. But here we've got IFC building element, and you've got a whole hierarchy there of IFCs. IFC building element is a subtype of IFC element, is a subtype of IFC product, is a subtype of IFC object, is a subtype of IFC route. You'll notice on the top right hand side there something that Benedict Wallbank mentioned, the global unique ID for any object. And this opens up the idea, in fact, that when we say object technology, something like a door or a wall in any of your CAD platforms, or indeed clauses in your non-graphic databases, are probably collections of very many objects, which have to define what the particular thing you're using, a wall or a door, what it actually does and how it portrays itself and how it behaves within the model. So you can see there the IFC building element, which is a very sort of generic thing there. There are other IFCs that qualify what that building element might be. You can see that IFC building element there actually relies on a hell of a lot more objects and classes of information. It is a model, and I'll come back to that in a little while. It is a modeling system rather than I know it changes data, moves data around from system to system, sorry, but it's a modeling exchange rather than a simple flat exchange. I'll come back to that. Here we've got IFC door, which is a subset of IFC building element, and there above that you can see the inheritance right up to the top of the root there, IFC door. And at that level, look, the door has simply got overall height and overall width defined within that entity. And that's partly why what you see there, that's if you think about a door and all that goes with a door, I mean, height is that structural height, finished height, leaf height, reveal height is that structural width, leaf width, reveal width. And that's why some of the IFC movement of information doesn't work, because there is no common, believe it or not, there is no common standard and recommendation of what else a software developer adds to that IFC to make it a door. What is the purpose of talking about this information? That's a good question, isn't it? Well, the reason I'm talking about IFCs is that a lot of people do talk to me about IFCs, and it's a growing topic within the BIM environment. I don't know whether anybody saw the Chartered Institute of Builders website this week, where Dave Philp, who will be coming to talk to you next week, is talking about BIM level 3 and IFCs and so on being part of a different and new sort of cyber world in BIM. So what the reason I'm doing some of this today is I want people to understand IFCs better than they are understood at the moment, because there's a lot of misinformation and misuse of information out there about IFCs and what the current capability of the IFC model is. There's a lot of misinformation out there about that. Mark Bew, for example, the leader of the BIM task group, will say it's the best we've got, and it is. But it still needs an awful lot of understanding and explanation to get complete data movement amongst the software platforms that we actually use. I'll come back to inheritance graph, but well, actually you can see IFC compartment, which was one of my IFCs, and you can see there it just has 3 types: has natural ventilation, has sprinkler protection, and has fire risk factor. So you've got to add a lot more IFCs to that to make it any particular fire compartment and to work with any particular software platform. Oops. And so I will I will mention the R word here. So all that lies behind that, those sort of principles, whether IFCs or not, that object technology and that object database set of concepts lies behind the R word, the Revit system, in terms of how it structures things into categories, families, types, and instances. So that also is a reason why I want to do this, is to give people a greater insight into what's behind the scenes in what they're using, and hopefully to be able to use them better and in a more informed way, and to understand why sometimes things do not work as they'd wished or intended. Okay, so I'm going to come on to information sharing, and I'm going to talk about a job I did. Merv did separate jobs in Avanti. I did something with this outfit called Summerfield, which is now part of the cooperative chain. Yes, you're happy to, yes, Mohammed, you're happy that I mentioned Revit. I can see your smiley face here. Jason North left the room. He didn't like that, did he? So we'll talk about Summerfield here, a chain of something like 1,500 shops. While I was working there on the Avanti project, they acquired QuickSave, something like 600 or 700 shops, I think. And a typical shop had a footprint from anywhere from 600 meters to 10,000 square meters. That was their typical shop size. I was happy to work in their headquarters in Bristol, watching them monitor every barcode swipe in every shop in the UK. And they had, whatever happened, whatever size of job they were doing, they had a 26-week rollout program. And if they said 2 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, that's the deadline, that was the deadline. And you can see, very simple actually in many respects, a high level week by week process of how 600 meters or 10,000 meters was brought into being under the Summerfield banner. And that would probably be a refurbished premise somewhere. It was fairly unusual for Summerfield to build a property, a shop, anew for themselves. It was usually in a parade of shops where they took it over from somebody else, refurbished it, and so on. But a very precise process, a precise list of who was responsible for what information, what they should supply, and when they should supply it. And I mentioned to you the sort of technique of stepping through projects in easy steps, and this was the actual Summerfield set of steps, gathering information. You can see, checking on the leases, checking on the capital expenditure figures, looking at refrigeration and maintenance potential in any property that they took on, any problems with toxic materials like asbestos and so on. And then there would be that would be a sort of probably a desktop and a visit kind of information gathering. Then next step would be a site survey and site visit in some detail if they decided to take on that property, and so on it went. collate the cost consultants, contracts, meet on site, and so on. So that's the high level process. But behind that, you know, even just that single one on the left there, gathering information. Sorry, there was a drill down there of who was gathering what, when, for what reason, who was responsible. I have read about BIM. Is it the same? Is it same the interoperability and IFC? Mohammed, yes, there's a question for today's lecture. Yes, you're quite right, Mohammed. IFC is the key to far, far better interoperability. You know, we use DJs, DXFs, all kinds of other exchange formats, but IFCs are a modeling format, and that means they want you. The aim is to model the behavior too. Instead of just putting things together in Navisworks or Saleeb and checking geometries and that being an inert, immovable model, the idea is that IFCs actually move behaviors around as well and relationships. And we're a little way from doing that at the moment. But
he's talking about the word open BIM in particular.
And open, I have read about open BIM. Is it the same? Yeah, yes, open BIM is the same sort of thing. You know, an enormous attempt to do things a bit like the Unix and Linux programs, where, you know, enlightened people all around the world sort of contribute to these things. The problem is, I think, is just sort of technical coordination, because I said when I talked about those IFCs, you've got to have a common, like you do with the building and all the stuff that we're thinking about in BIM, in the software world, you've got to have a common understanding of how you're going to implement IFCs. So I wish, in some respects, people with open BIM and IFCs, built smart and so on, would actually get together and form one group, if nothing else, but for technical consistency.
Another question.
Another question.
Regarding critical path for Summerfield, I think we're talking here about project management in general, not BIM.
Yeah, you could say that, Saad, except to say that in doing, I'm going to come on to more of the information aspect in a minute with Summerfield, if you'll bear with me. Graham Wilson.
Can I just add something here?
Yeah.
In my opinion, Saad, project management is part of BIM. BIM is an overall umbrella, if you may, that contains inside it a lot of things: information management, project management, design management, construction management. It's basically the more efficient ways of doing all of the above together, integrated and collaborated. But as Steve said, we will be talking more about that later on, and we will have project management sessions next term as well, which are customized specifically to BIM.
I'm a minute behind now. I was only watching yourself a minute since. Graham,
yeah.
We use IFC as the format for federating models across native software and using native softwares and using a 3D environment, but don't understand how the raw data is used by others outside the 3D environment. Not sure what you mean by the raw data, Graham, but when somebody tells me they're using IFCs, I always want to know to what extent. I mean, for example, did you use IFCs to detail the damp-proof membrane at the bottom edge of the building, or the roof coping at the top edge of the building? My guess is you probably didn't. And when anybody sort of asks me or prompts that as a question or comment, I always want to know to what extent they were successful in using IFCs. Because, as I hope I'm beginning to point out, the IFC model doesn't cover absolutely everything that we do. Yes, geometry has settled down because of certain individuals and doing their PhDs and so on, and been coached and mentored by some very enlightened people, geometry in the IFC world has settled down to a very large extent, although you still can lose some things if you're into complicated B-splines and that kind of thing. But as far as a lot of other things that we do, the IFC model still needs quite a bit of development. Question: is it your experience? Chris has a question. Is it your experience that developers do not want to open up their object in IFC because it gives away then? That's absolutely right. Yes, there is a large element in what you say there, Chris, because you know, in some respects, the IFC model begs the question that in some respect there is an external structure that is no longer the complete secretive within the complete secretive custodianship of any software development platform. So you're quite right. In some respects, they do have to reveal something of their internal structure, and also to try. I mean, I've tried doing this for 8 years to try and get the software vendors to sign up to this thing. Does actually mean that they have to collaborate, they have to cooperate too, and they're very reluctant to do that. You know, that this siloism in terms of the traditional software vendors is an inhibition to the IFC model being developed. It needs a big player like Microsoft or Google at one stage with SketchUp. It needs a big player with enormous resource, thousands of software engineers, to blow a big hole in this and present us with something entirely different that does work. I mean, MFCs, Microsoft Foundation classes, are a good example. You know, Microsoft Foundation classes are behind Microsoft Office. A big player comes along, and you know, we all use, well, a lot of people use Office and Word and Access and PowerPoint and all the rest of it because of that big player making that big statement. We haven't got the equivalent of a Microsoft or a Google in the construction industry yet, and we need that to blow apart the traditional software vendors.
Can I add something here as well, Steve?
Yeah.
I'd like to stress on the word that Steve said about you would be sharing part of your development, not all of it, because you have to remember that in the IFC you do lose something. You do lose the parametric relationships between the objects, inside the objects. Again, this is something that we will be talking about later. So you cannot actually do proper editing using IFC. You can only do to a certain limit or a certain extent. You can take from it to a certain limit and certain extent. It is not like a native file. I just wanted to add that.
So back to Summerfield, and there's the drilling down. And Mohammed said, I think I'm hoping I'm moving away from the sort of project management idea that Mohammed thought I had. Here on the left-hand side is how Summerfield, and this, you can tell this is slightly old because I'm talking in terms of layers here, but this is how Summerfield named their layers on a shop. And you see a lovely sort of mishmash area: border, box, canopy, column, hatch, coal hatch, quick count, croom, dims, shelve, removed walls. What does that tell you about the structure of information that's in any of their databases? Very, very little indeed. And coming up now is how I mapped those things for them onto the BS 1192 format, using a CISFB coding classification for building elements. Yes, there's more of it, of course there is, but there is a standard, an industry standard, a common understanding there. That if you just look back on the left-hand column there, the things they called box, what could that be? Was that boxes of food, in boxes of what? Boxes of drinks or what? No. It was the little bits and pieces left over when the standard shelf unit or refrigeration unit didn't fit exactly between two walls. A length of cabinets didn't fit between two walls, and they sort of just boxed it in. They filled it in, and it was all those little infill pieces that they meant by box. But there's a classification for it. It can be done. It's dead easy. That's a sort of half hour exercise to map that onto BS 1192. Didn't quite get them to a a kind of I suppose you could call this a common data environment of sorts, but we gently edged them along, and believe you me, this was an improvement on what they had originally. But nevertheless, each sort of discipline wanted to keep its own little folder structure. So there you'll see signage people, signage took over, involved marketing and PR people, the architect, the refrigeration contractors, the actual building contractors and M&E, all wanted their little folder structure. So yeah, okay, I'll take that for the time being, provided it's common, provided we all use it, provided we all understand it. And here we've got a sort of very simplified implementation of BS 1192 that we got them to use. So there's a master set of drawings, plans and elevation sections on the left hand side there. Summerfield issue something to the external players when there's a new project. So 1501 is the shop number, SO is Summerfield, P for plan, G for ground, 2D, refrigeration engineer, RE, and I for information is put out there to the external player. The external player, in this case refrigeration engineers, do what they have to do and send it back to within Summerfield, and it's got status P now for proposed. It's checked, it's checked, reviewed, approved through a particular process, a more detailed process, like we had that more detailed process for gathering the information, a big sort of drill down process, checked, reviewed, and then incorporated back into the master plan. A for approved status at the end there. So that's a quick sort of gentle movement of Summerfield, fairly simple, fairly straightforward, but a lot of potent principles there that can be picked up and used. And a very important thing in my view is what happens when the classification system, if you're using Uniclass, CISFB, trying to use BS 1192, things like CISFB and the new, whether you use Uniclass 1.4 or Uniclass, the new Uniclass 2, they never cover absolutely everything. So if the classification system doesn't cover what you want, and in this case I came across merchandising, for which there's nothing in CISFB, then you don't just allow people to put stuff in willy-nilly. Yes, you can put that information on one side, knowing that it is there and knowing that it has to be dealt with in some quality controlled way. Then you get the group together, the project team, whoever it might be, or people in the office, whoever's the custodianship of your standards, you get them together and say, look, we've come across this new topic, how do we extend our data standard? You never let it get out of control. You never let people add information willy-nilly and on an ad hoc basis. Somebody's got, is that you? Got an IFC? It's not you.
No, there's a question.
Question? Mohammed again. Mohammed is a good lad, isn't he, Mohammed? He's good value. Question: what is the way you unify the standard for how tools like Revit and ArchiCAD for IFC purpose? What is the way? Well, Mohammed, I hope in some respects I'm showing you the way. You've got to get people together and see and get them to reveal their standard. If you use one of these CPICS documents that I referred to earlier on, there are places in there where you get them to reveal far more detail about their CAD standard. And again, that is a step in the right direction. I don't care if we don't move anywhere else, but just to declare all those standards, put them on the table, know how we manage them. But if you can, you use simple steps to get people unified on one on one version. It is not easy, I'll grant you, and it takes a lot of coaxing. Corporate branding was another form of information here that CISFB in that case didn't cope with. So we got together with their corporate branding team, looked at the types of information that they wanted to represent in the databases and on the drawings, and came up with an extension to the CAD standard. So never let the CAD standard get out of control. There should be somebody there all the time who's responsible for it, who's keeping around the project. I mean, for example, I can think of another example where a smaller office specialising in historic buildings. Now, neither, I mean, I'm not sure about a new Uniclass because it looks like a bit of a, looks as though it's a bit of a state of flux at the moment. But the old
Uniclass 2 is still being developed
yes,
at the moment by MBS. Yeah.
Yes, but Uniclass 1.4 didn't have an awful lot to say about historic buildings. You know, there's not many classifications for gargoyles and flying buttresses and pointed arches and Norman columns and so on. So again, you've got to expand your CAD standard to accommodate the kind of work that you're dealing with. Just a little example here from Summerfield, a silly example in some respects. I know I'm stretching a point, but looking at drawings, a couple of their drawings, and looking at that one on the top left there with in the red circle, those dimension lines overlap. So we've lost 25 millimeters of space. Now, if you think that in any typical shop there might be 8 of these bays, double-sided, 4 stacks at least, so that might add up to 7.2 meters of shelf space per shop. 1,500 shops, that's 10,800 meters. At that time, a meter off shelf on average earned about £10 per day, and for 365 days, if that mistake were replicated, would lose them something like £39.2 million worth of business. Now, I know that's stretching the point, but you do get my point. That's bad coordination, and it's leading to problems. Here we've got 24 feet of crisps shelves. 24 feet is 7.315, 7,315 millimeters. But in actual fact, when we ran a dimensioning command over that distance, it measured 6,986. So somebody hadn't been conforming to that notion of using the automatic dimensioning and accurate placement of elements. Same thing down at the bottom there, 12 feet, and somebody mentioned feet and inches there. There was a mixture at Summerfield of all 4 units, feet and inches, millimeters, meters and centimeters, which is a bit of a mess. So
can I say something before you go on?
Can, Auntie Noha, yes.
Just remembered something. One of the problems which might cause something like that, I'm not saying on this project, is
you can say on that project.
I don't know it. Haven't been in it. Is the IFC problem again? If you transfer, if you exchange the information as IFC and then open it up again in a native file, and you change the geometry, it doesn't necessarily change the dimension. And the other way around, if you change the dimension, it will not automatically change the geometry. Hence, you will find conflicts if you are not aware and always validating your data as you go along.
Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, now delving a little deeper into volumes.
Now, this is important, guys. Very important, because I'll continue a little bit about that and when I talk. Yes.
Well, no. What will I say? Will you agree? Disagree?
Of course, agree.
Okay. Well, I'd like to think that I had a little bit of a hand in inventing this idea of volumes. At the induction day, I mentioned to you that at Oxford Region between 1971 and 1975, we invented one of the world's first 3-dimensional modeling systems. And that system spanned through from conceptual design, through detailed design, through to construction and some off-site construction. And one of the things that we invented, I'd say 2 of us, because you saw on that funny slide I had in my office in 1979, you saw a younger Steve Race and a Richard Darcy. And we were the partners, in 2 guys in the research and development team. And we decided that in inventing this 3-dimensional modeling system, we would have things called spaces, which is not surprising, is it, in buildings? And they could have all kinds of different uses, of course. So in a hospital, there will be the departments that you know, and the rooms, X-ray, maternity pharmacies, the acute wards, the maternity wards, geriatric wards, psychiatric wards, and so on. So they would be all familiar kinds of spaces. But there are other kinds as well, which we worked with our engineers, and we got some of our engineers to work out sort of approximate sizings of ducts. So there are some implicit spaces, like the volumes served by certain air conditioning units and duct layouts and so on. So there's some implicit kinds of spaces, air conditioning, electrical distribution, again, implicit spaces. The space served by an electrical distribution board, a major board, a high voltage board, low voltage board, and so on, all define a particular space. And depending on how good your estate manager is, when you start to shut down some of these boards, you can get a bit surprised as to who's actually linked into some of these things. But anyway, this was sort of early design. So we invented types of space to represent all these implicit kinds of spaces. And fire compartments, an fairly obvious one. And in some respects, yes, sometimes you do put a sort of line around the fire compartment. But we created these as 3-dimensional spaces, so that any architect or set of engineers, I mean, in those days, we were always trying to get this system was accessible, totally open, accessible to architects, engineers, interior designers, medical planners, medical administrators, and so on. And we tried to get some of these initial spaces, different ideas of initial spaces for any designer from any profession to work with. And structural engineering, we've got sort of movement joints, you know, the big sort of gaps, you know, well constructed and well detailed gaps that we leave in construction for movement joints imply a certain space. Likewise, cladding and so on. Now, if you stick them all together, fire compartment, structural space, it's amazing how rich that thing is in terms of design implications. And they were just spaces. And any air conditioning zone or fire compartmentation zone, as I'm saying it now, because I'm used to it, because that's how we named it, we invented it. Any zone is a simple aggregation of spaces. So in my world, and I'm going through this section of the lecture today to indicate a little bit of confusion about volumes and where they've come from and how they're used. And we simply had space and zone. And a zone was an aggregation of space. So, you know, fire compartment does cover corridors, certain corridors, or in a hospital, you know, you've probably got a 2-hour compartment around a medical gas store or something like that. You've got all kinds of implied spaces. If you contrast that with PAS 1192, and it says it's a manageable spatial subdivision of a project, defined by the project team as a subdivision of the overall project. Well, that's okay. And to a certain extent, that was born out of early Revit versions, which didn't have the sort of capacity to handle very large multidisciplinary projects. And to a certain extent, we've got that idea embedded in the Revit product. Again, from PAS 1192, this, Auntie Noha and I have looked at this before and sort of confused ourselves a little bit. A 7.6 from Clause 7.6 from PAS 1192 talks about volumes, and it is rather confusing in my view. And I think if you do want to talk about volumes, it's simply a practical, pragmatic way of dividing up a building for easier use. It's nothing to do with some of those ideas of early design spaces and zones that we had. And what I want to do here,
There's a question here.
a question.
Regarding volumes, is there an error in PAS 1192? The diagram isn't fully labeled. Diagram.
I
This one.
I know. Yes, I know the diagram you mean. I don't really want to call it an error. I'll just leave it on the table that I am a little bit confused by PAS 1192's ideas and portrayals of volumes. Auntie Noha might disagree. I don't know. I don't know what she's going to say.
Just take the main idea behind it. I mean, even if the diagram isn't very clear. And we will, as Steve will explain now, and I will also say a couple of things as well. Hopefully it'll be more clearer.
Okay, so here I am actually going to the real complete version Building Smarts IFCs. Oh, come on. And if we go to the defined entities, you will see that there is no IFC volume. It is actually used as simply as a word in the explanations, that's all. But you will see an IFC zone, and even that, I'm a little bit ashamed to say, I think is slightly perplexing. Zones may not be hierarchical. Zones themselves, no, that's correct. But a zone is a hierarchy of spaces, and I don't think that's clear in the IFC definition. And if we go back up the entities list, we'll see IFC space there. A space represents an area volume bounded actually or theoretically, and that's what came through from the work. I mean, the personalities behind this are that we at Oxford Region developed some of those spaces, I said. Then a guy called Jeff Wicks, who used to be Nick Nesbitt's boss, who started the IAI, which is now Building Smart in this country, picked up on the work that we've been doing at Oxford Region and liked it and began to incorporate into the IFC modelling world. But again, it got slightly diluted. Unfortunately, Jeff died a couple of years ago, and that's a shame because he's a big sort of influence in terms of IFCs. But a volume, you can see volume there is only used as a descriptive word. It doesn't have a definition. There's no IFC volume at all. So personally, grinding a bit of an axe here in some respects, I'd like to see PAS 1192 clear itself and simply speak about spaces. Oh, what have I done there? Oh, here we go. Talk about zones and spaces. Lastly, I think, because I'm going on a bit here, data hierarchy. I hope from that this is a kind of simplified IFC model. If you think about IFC root at the top, element, door, and so on, if you think about it like that, then if we stick information in here, it applies to everything in the hierarchy. Not often a lot you can do at that sort of level. There's not a lot of information that applies to absolutely everything on the job, except for sort of project name, project location, project detail, and so on. Pop information in at that level, and it applies to everything below. Pop information in at that level, and it applies to everything below. And then you get sort of information, specific things for particular instances of a particular class of objects entered at that sort of level. And again, going back to the Oxford Regional Health Model, we had the functional zones, yes, the wards, the theatres, the pharmacy, and so on. we had those things that we call served areas, the low temperature hot water, recycled air conditioning, dirty extract, clean extract, and so on. We had structural zones, the movement joints, and wind bracing, and so on. We even had cost zones, which I'll say more about in another lecture, I think. We had cost zones, and we had the 5 compartments. And of course, there's a data hierarchy. And if you shove data in at that level, it applies to everything below. If you push data in at that level, it applies to everything below. Push data at that level, applies to everything below. And we could do that for all those things that we called wards and dirty utility rooms and so on. And we could stick engineering information into appropriate spaces, again on the data hierarchy, and likewise information into 5 compartmentation and subcompartmentation. And Nick Nesbitt will come along, I think, and talk to you about Kobe. And there you can see Nick is applying that IFC idea here in terms of just spaces and zones. There is no mention of volume there. No mention of volume there. And I'm back to an IFC hierarchy there. And I think that's me for today. Any other questions? And if there isn't, it'll be anti Noha.
Oh, there was a question earlier.
A question?
Oh, sorry, I'm just getting it.
Are you asking me a question? Is that a question?
No. I was trying to answer. All right. If we are, that's a question from Mohammed. If we are asked for 2D drawings with the CAD standard, how will we get the most benefit of BIM?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Well, Mohammed, you've got to, you'll be putting graphics together in a 2D world in any case. So you put the 2D graphics together just as you would a 3D object. A door or a chair or a column. Make sure that whatever system you're using, it has a container for information in a 2D world. Just make sure that container contains just the information about that element. I mean, so often in the old 2D world, people stuffed everything on one layer, and a bit like the paper drawing world, hoped that all the information that you needed was there somewhere. And of course, if you stick it all on one layer in a 2D world, you can't sort it. You can't supply other people in the project team with the precise information they want. So all these principles apply in the 2D world just the same as the 3D world.
There's also nothing to stop you from producing the 2D drawings from the 3D models and produce the information as much as you like. So there's no need to lose any of the BIM benefits which you're mentioning just because you're asked to produce 2D at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. Mohammed, I'm talking about paperless engineering, but I believe we still need 2D until we solve some official problems. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Tanushka, if there are different standards, how do you know which standard to follow for which type of project?
Good point.
Well, you have to decide at the very beginning what standards you're going to use with your with the other disciplines and with the other people in the supply chain. It has to be created and written properly right from the start in the BEP, and it has to also be identified in the information, in the employee information requirements, as I'm going to say now. As long as everything is set out right from the start and you know which standards you're using, then that's fine. Steve, do you want to say anything about that?
No, that's exactly the answer I would have given Noha.
Is there a good guide to how to best construct a model? That's a very generic one, Chris. If you find one, please tell me. Right. So, mine. Okay. So I'll move on to my part. Again, I'll try not to take too much time. All right. So this is what I want to talk to you about. So Mervyn started talking last time about the documents for level 2 BIM. And there was mention about the EIR, Employee Information Requirements, and the BEP, the BIM Execution Plan, amongst other things, of course. There was also talk about file naming conventions. So I'd like to give a little bit more detail about that. Again, Mervyn will be talking more when we see him next time. But I just like to direct your attention to a few things regarding these, and then I'll be talking at the end about the technical management issues that should be taken into account during project setup, in particular during project setup. Okay, so let me start. All right, if you look at the PAS, right, PAS 1192, of course, you will find that it divides up the details that should be written inside the employer's information requirements as follows. So it divides it up into information management requirements, commercial management requirements, and competence assessment requirements. So all of these things in green should theoretically be inside the employer's information requirements. So what are they? So the levels of details that are to be used at the different stages of the project, different stages of the life cycle. The training requirements for the different personnel that are involved, the different teams that are involved, the software formats and their versions, of course, used by the different people, the designers, the contractors, the subcontractors, and so on. This is to be asked by the client in the EIR. Of course, the coordinates origin, the geospatial location of the project, it has to be written inside the EIR as well. I mean, where is the project in relation to Earth, all right? Management of the modeling process, so you have to have a plan for the work. Segregation of the data that will be included along the life cycle. This has to be written, sorry, not written, has to be asked by the client in the EIR. How management of coordination and clash detection should be done, again, to be asked by the client. How collaboration between the teams will be asked, including CDM, health and safety management. Information that's supposed to be included or excluded from the models, okay? So the things that should or should not be there to be stressed by the client in particular, because he might ask for things which are not the norm or which have not been asked for previously in other projects that the client has worked on with that organization, for example. The size of the model files to be exchanged, any security precautions to be taken into account that the client is asking for to protect the data. The exchange of information, how is it going to be exchanged? Are we using IFC? Are we using something different? The client's strategic purposes, so the client should indicate what his purposes, objectives are from this project. A responsibility matrix, I mean, we'll talk a lot about details of all of these things, but just take them for now. The responsibility matrix containing who is responsible for what throughout the project. What standards are being used? Are we using the PAS? Are we using ISOs? Are we using any British standards or other standards to conform with throughout the project? The roles and responsibilities of every single party on the project should be identified or asked for by the client. Maybe he wants a project manager from the contractor side who aligns or cooperates with the project manager from the consultant, which is the client representative. Maybe not. Maybe he needs a BIM manager with the designing team. Maybe not. Okay. Competence assessment. So this is another thing written inside the PAS that should be inside the EIR. How does the client expect the competence of the teams to be assessed with regards to BIM? The changes to the associated tender documents, original tender documents, and BIM tender assessment details. All right. So these are the things that are asked for within the PAS. All right. Now, as we will see later, okay, we have a common template, a common EIR template, which again you will find inside the documents shared in Moodle. This was created by the BIM task group, which contains a sort of it's in a table form, and it's a template for people to use in order to create the EIR, all right? So I tried mapping the things inside that template with the things inside the paths that are required in the paths. And this is what I got. Okay, just forget the arrows for now, okay? I'm not asking you to go through them one by one, but you will notice that well, before you notice the arrows, let's just go one step back. You will notice that the template, when you see it, is divided up into 3 areas, which are a bit different from those outlined in the paths. So information management has technical, okay? I don't know, instead of it or aligned with it. Commercial management now has just management, replacing it. And competence assessment now has commercial. Obviously, these two are not related, but this is how the sections inside the template are divided up. So if I go back to the alignment, which I was mentioning, you will find that almost all of the requirements asked for in the paths are present in the template, with the exception of the ones in red, okay? So the information that's supposed to be included or excluded from the models specifically, to, those that are specifically asked by the employer or the client, there is no section inside the template for that, all right? And these last two are particularly interesting. Changes associated with the tender document and assessment details associated with the tender documents. These two also do not exist in the current template of the EIR. Now, the reason why I'm directing your attention to this is that there is no hard set rule for how to create an EIR. Just because you have something that is recommended out there or a template, it does not mean that you have to use it as it is. Of course, it is best if we have standards to follow. But if you feel that there is something that should be added there, then of course you should add it. For example, the template contains two particular areas here which were not included in the past, but from my humble opinion, I think they're important. For example, the compliance plan. How do you intend to show compliance or quality assurance of what will be presented or delivered at the end with the employer requirements? So I mean, it goes without saying that it is logical for the client to say what kind of quality assurance he wants to see with the deliverables, and also the delivery strategy for the asset information. Now, we know that there's the PAS 1192 Part 3, which talks more about the asset information. So it was logical to have this part here that talks about asset information and the FM part of the project, which was not part of the PAS 1192. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that, and you will need to think about that analytically and critically when you see the Project 1 report, which I'll hopefully be uploading tonight inside PAS, inside Moodle, I'm sorry. Okay, as I mentioned in the email I sent you last Wednesday, please read the project carefully, all right? And we will have a quick discussion about it next Friday. We'll try to finish a little bit earlier, and just make sure that you stay for a little bit longer afterwards, because if you have any questions, we would be very happy to answer them. I won't tell you what it's about right now. You have a read when you go home. Anyway, so going back, so we talked about the EIR. Now, what about the BIM execution plan? As Mervyn was mentioning, there is a pre-BEP that you can use or a post-BEP that you can use. The pre-BEP can be used to assign teams at the beginning of a project, and the BEP, the post-BEP, can contain all of the different requirements, all the different deliverables and how the project will work specifically after all of the teams are on board. So again, as outlined in the PAS, what should be in the BIM execution plan? These are the things which should be in the execution plan. And as you can see, they are very, very specific, very, very particular, which means that if specified right from the start, hopefully there should not be a lot of problems, a lot of litigation, and a lot of lawsuits and you name it, all right? Because everything has been specified and followed right from the start. So what are these things? And I can see there are a few questions, but I'll take them just when I finish this part. So you should have what kind of the teams should collaborate together, and a common BIM manager or whoever the person who is responsible for creating the BEP, whether it be from the client representative or whoever is agreed to be the person to actually write this down. According to the collaboration between the teams, there should be an agreement on what kind of standards are going to be used for the methods and the procedures throughout the project. Again, this should be in alignment with the EIR. What kind of volume strategy will be used, okay? We're not dividing up the volumes as yet, but what is the strategy for the division of the volumes? Who will do the volume strategy division, for example? Where are the origins and orientations of that project, okay? What is the file naming convention that will be followed? Is it going to be according to the BS 1192? The layer naming conventions, agreed construction tolerances. This is all inside the PAS, by the way. Drawing sheet templates and attribute data, annotation, dimensions, abbreviations, symbols. Of course, the task information delivery plan and the master information delivery plan. I know we have not talked about them, but basically what they do is that they say who is assigned to what, to deliver what and when, okay? And we would again talk later more in detail. Software versions, exchange formats, roles and responsibilities, including names. So who in particular, from which company, from which department is responsible for what in particular, and the deliverables, the exact deliverables, including in some cases model, I won't say model names, but model types, and the dates, of course, for handover of the different deliverables and the milestones. How the work will be divided up inside the common data environment, and if there are any other process or data management systems. And of course, the sequence of the model preparation. So these are the things which are outlined in the PAS. Now, I have not aligned this with a template for the BIM execution plan, the one that we have. The reason being, again, this can be customizable, and you can customize the templates however you wish to include whatever you see is important. Okay, so a few questions. I assume that the training requirements in the EIR relate to the training that the client team needs, the training that all of the teams need. So in the EIR. So the client would basically be saying that he would require training on this, this, and that. And the different teams within the BEP would then say how that's to be done. Steve, again, if you want to say something.
I agree with what Noha says. I think it's as important to train the client team and get them to procure the right thing. And a lot of client procurement teams still don't understand a lot of BIM principles. And in fact, it's not just training, it's an education exercise for them as well. And you need somebody there drawing up the EIRs who can actually explain to clients what the implications of some of the EIR requirements are and why they're there and what their significance is.
Okay, thank you, Steve. In the EIR is management of modeling, plan work, and data segregation where volumes and spaces should be defined? Not necessarily. I mean, you can do that, but there is no particular place that you should place something in. I mean, if you decide to place it in another part, as long as it's there, that's the important thing.
I think it's perhaps more of a BEP thingy, more on the BEP thingy side of the world, because how you divide things up into volumes of space, as I've discussed today, it's more in the implementation of the project. So it's rather at that end of events, I think, that it's more pertinent.
What the EIR might mention, I mean, in agreement with what Steve is saying, is whether there should be a volume division or not, and who's responsible for it, rather than the strategy itself. The strategy would be in the BEP. What about the ownership of the model? Well, the ownership of the models are assumed right from the start to be for the client, Mohammed, in the end. I mean, the ownership of all of the models in the end should revert back to the client. So this should go without saying. But if there is any changes to that, then that can be in the contract, all right? Mervyn was saying a particularly important thing last time, and I commented on it in the email that I sent everybody, that within the phase where when a team is working, then within that particular phase or within that particular time, that team has ownership for the models that they are working on, just during the time when they are working on them, because they should have they should be held liable for what they put in those models. But in the very end, all ownership of models should go to the client, unless otherwise specified in the contract. Steve, anything?
I think there is a slight difference between a legal ownership and ownership for the time being in a model. I agree with Noha that you've always got an obligation to be professionally correct and coordinate a model and so on. But I think there is a distinction between legal ownership and what we're calling ownership of the model from time to time during a project.
Yeah. Mina, what do you mean by volume? The volume is what Steve explained, Mina, about dividing up the whole design space into parts, into different parts, in order that people may be able to work at the same time. So different teams might be working inside different volumes. So maybe one person has the east wing of the building, another one has the west wing. And again, I will talk a little bit about that later on. Maybe the structural, a team is doing the ground floor, another team is doing the second floor, for example. So it's dividing up an area into manageable spaces that can be worked inside without another team working inside that one, all right? And I'll speak a little bit more about that again. How long can the BEP development take from scratch?
Because you've got
It depends on the project, and it depends on how collaborative you are with the rest of the teams. If you are the client representative and you are meeting up with the different designer teams, the architect, the structural, and blah, 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 and you have the contractor on board and you have the people from the supply chain as well, maybe, okay? So maybe it can be easier and faster if you have everybody collaborating rather than do it individually and then pass it on to each person to get their agreement. I cannot tell you how long. Layer naming convention, is it valid for BIM software? No, it is not, Chema. No, it is not. But again, if you are required to use 2D at any point, then of course you should have a convention for it. Is the MIDP a separate plan or part of the BEP? The past diagram indicates that they're separate. The MIDP would mainly be in the form of a table, which is attached to the BEP. So I don't know if you would consider that as being separate or part of it, but it's a separate created entity, which is then part of the BEP documents, if you want to call them. Steve, again, if you have anything to say about that.
No.
AutoCAD Civil still uses layers. Okay, I think I export through. Regarding training, surely there should be some sort of test to pass. It depends on the organization and what kind of training is put in place. Sometimes, I mean, just talking about that, Andy, sometimes what happens is that an organization would send out 1 or 2 people who have seniority to take a certain course and pass the tests in it, and then they come back and do internal training inside the company, which wouldn't involve testing most of the time. It really depends on how you do it.
It'll be you guys who are setting the tests in the future, having gone through this course.
How detailed do you think the early MIDP should be within the EIR pre-contract BEP, or is this something for the post-contract BEP? In my opinion, Chris, it's in the post-contract BEP. That's in my opinion. Autodesk certifications might show that you can operate software, not that you understand, for example, how to use the BS. True, Andy. That's why Steve was just saying you're the ones who will create the tests, the assessment of the teams inside your companies or when you're creating a project. And I mean, which returns us back to the assessment, the CPIC assessment forms. I mean, the reason why we have them is for people to show evidence that they understand, not that they know how to operate the technology. All right. Mina, volume is phasing, space phasing. Yeah, space phasing. Lee, when clients are not familiar with the EIR, how will they be able to complete this form for a project at the correct time? At the moment, it needs a little bit of pushing from the consultant, from the people who are on the team, from the design build organization, a design build contractor, whoever is in contact with the client when they come to sign up with the client. There is a little bit of pushing that has to be done, or explaining that might be involved to inform the client and get him on board with it and create it. Otherwise, it's you guys who will suffer in the end if the client does not have a clear EIR from the beginning to follow. He might ask things which were not expected later on and just say that it wasn't there.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, sure.
I'll always add the point that if the client doesn't know or doesn't understand or doesn't want, there is still nothing stopping the team doing it. You know, so if the client's a bit ignorant about EIRs, in some respects, don't worry, because in a way you can write your own BEP then. But you know, that doesn't preclude the team from doing a good BEP in any case.
That's true. If the client wants DWG information, for example, to coordinate a ceiling, he will have to adopt my BIM information following the client edited DWGs, then the BIM collaboration will be broken. Is that a statement or a question, Chema? Not sure. Okay, if you'd like to elaborate on that one. Isn't that the construction tolerances, dimensions, symbols, etc. are already defined by codes? Some of them. Tolerances are not, but there are other things, the things related to dimensions, for example, which are in the BS. Yeah. How long is a piece of string? Good one, Andy. Is it right to say that the client will have the legal ownership while the design ownership remain with the design author? Tricky one, Tanushka. Depends what you mean by design ownership. Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Yeah, you will have, Thanushka, the usual rules apply. Copyright will reside with every person who believes the design. Architects do believe the design, but if you look at something like the shard or the cheese grater, the structural engineer might have had an awful lot to do with design. So the designer, by law, retains the copyright, but grants a license in perpetuity for the use of that design to the client. That's a different issue to owning data in a model sat on servers.
Tom, there was talk from Merv about an accreditation coming in like an ISO. Yes, Mervyn did say something about ISO standards for BIM, international ISO standards for BIM, which what we heard is going to adopt a lot of the British standard, the British PASs. But may I just put a little clarification here that there's a difference between a standard and an accreditation. The accreditation is when you say that something is appropriate or is valid for something or is in accordance with something. So after the standards come out, there needs to be, or even with the current standards that we have, there needs to be some kind of accreditation by the government, which would say that these people are complying with those standards or not, whether they are BIM compliant in general or not. So there's supposed to be another accreditation that is currently being created. I don't know when it's going to be created by the UCAS, but I mean, this is still under development, I'm guessing. Good reference to develop EIR. I think there are a lot of guides out there, Mohammed. I personally do not know of a particular one, but this is why we're doing this, I guess.
Actually, Mohammed, I'd talked to Michael Boyd and Graham Stewart in the first cohort. They're doing some, and Darren Fitz. They're doing some very good work now on EIRs, and they really have got this button down.
But if you need a book or something, I do not know a particular book.
I agree.
You would have to look at case studies, and we have a lot of lecturers coming later on who will be talking about the EIR that they have developed in projects and how it worked, how it didn't work, and so on. And BEPS as well. You can have pick answers boxes below. Is that something related to, I don't think that's a question, Machi, but if it is, please write it again. CPIC forms are good to manipulate to what you wish to achieve from the assessment. Yes, I think case studies and interviews are best personally. You definitely, Jack, you can use both. Or
sorry, Jack, I missed you out there. I didn't realize you were there. Yes, talk to Jack Dealov as well.
Yes, definitely. And we have also Tanushka, Sean, and Michaela as well there. Sorry, guys, from the second cohort. You're in now. What is the difference in the structure between the pre-BEP and the post-BEP? Is the structure that you illustrated for the pre or the post? Well, the one I have here would be more suitable for the post-BEP. There is another template for the pre-BEP, which is basically just shorter. It just contains some of the sections in the post-BEP. So that's why I showed the full post-BEP here. Pre-BEP is a strategy without background info of how or who is to achieve that. Post-BEP is an actual plan. Yes, the post-BEP is an actual plan to achieve the project goals with info of who and what and how. Yeah. A pre-BEP is a plan of approach. A post-BEP is the actual approach. Well done, Jack. I like that. James, in these early days of BIM, the EIRs probably won't be that good. True. Maybe projects should share these nationally so each can be built on constant improvement. What are the chances of that? Not a lot, I think, at the moment. But there are people who are sharing things. Sure, you'll find things out there. Is there or will there be anything like the BIM assessor? Hopefully, when there is something to assess according to. So when the accreditation is out, there will be proper BIM assessors. There is something like that is happening in Singapore at the moment. I mean, we have Rex with us in the second cohort as well. If you want to contact him, he'll be very happy to tell you about that, because they have certain assessment criteria, accreditation criteria, that the government uses to assess what's happening in the different projects, and it's compulsory for each project to be assessed. So I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you more about that. Hopefully we'll have it soon. Is it possible for a company to obtain a BIM certificate from any certification body? All right, you're talking, Chema, you're talking about a company level BIM certificate. No, that's not available at the moment, BIM certificate. There is what is it, the BS 11,000 or 11, yeah. Which
BRE.
No, I'm talking about the BS 11,000. It's about collaboration, and it gives a certification, proper certification, that the that the organization has good collaboration within the teams. But that's regarding collaboration. There is no current BIM certification for a company level from any certification body. There are a few at individual level. If you want to seek them, yeah, like the BRE, like the RICS. But please be aware, this is not an accreditation, Sean. An accreditation is a nationally and internationally wide accepted standard or something to follow. What we're talking about is a certification. A certification issued by a professional body is only applicable for that body, so it is not recognized everywhere, nationally and internationally. That's one thing. And the other thing, a certification is time limited. So you would have to repeat it every few years, 3 years, 5 years, however long it's valid for, in order, so you have to repeat it or revalidate it or update it, just like the PMP certification. You have to update your status every few years, okay? So there's a difference between accreditation and certification. There are a few certifications out there, but what we're hoping for is an accreditation on a national level and international level. All right. Okay, seems to be that for now. Brilliant questions, guys. Very happy. Okay, seems I've lost my laptop.
You did, Noha.
Oh, thank you, Steve.
Cries out for a rationalization, doesn't it?
Okay, let's go on to something else that Mervyn mentioned briefly, and again, he will talk in more depth next time when he talks about the common data environment. You will love next time. Anyway, okay, so file naming conventions. Now, what's the importance of this? When you share your files or exchange them inside the common data environment, as I mentioned, you will know later how to do that properly next time and later on. You have to have a standard to follow. So if you're the designers, for example, and you're naming your files in a particular way, and then the contractor comes aboard and he wants to name them in another different way, and then you have the subcontractors coming in and they have a third way, there will be a huge confusion and there will be a lot of mistakes and errors because you are not all following a particular sequence and a particular way in naming the files. So the BS 1192 2007 has put a nice, I'll say, recommendation on how to name your files. All right. The name basically consists of 10 different parts. Okay, it's not as difficult as you might think. It's actually pretty easy. I'll just go through it quickly. And the part from 1 to 7 are, I won't say the compulsory ones, but the required ones. And from 8 to 10 are optional, right? So this is very important, especially when you're doing international projects with other companies. And every company has its own way of conventions in the naming of its files and folders. And I'm not talking just about the models. I'm talking about any file, any information file, whether it be email, whether it be spreadsheets, COBE, the models, contract documents, whatever, okay? There has to be a certain convention that everybody in all of the teams are following in order for that to flow smoothly inside the common data environment when you share the information between all the parties. So let me just go a little bit into that. All right, try to be a bit faster. All right, so the required ones. Number 1 is a project identifier, or what's the name of the project. I will go into detail. Second one is who's the originator, whether it be the organization who's creating it or the person. Third one is the volume number, the volumes that Steve started talking about, and I'll also talk a little bit about more. Number 4, the level number, for example, the floor number. 5, the type of file, all right, again, we'll talk about that. Number 6, the role creating the file, architect, etc. Number 7, the file number itself. And then the optional ones at the end. The first one is the status code of the file, which is extremely, extremely important, but optional, all right? And the second one is the revision number of that file. And thirdly, the version of that revision, okay? So let me just go a little bit into detail about that. All right, the first one, the project identifier, is usually a 2 to 6 character code. And what it usually signifies is who is the organization that is creating it, or the person who is creating it. And it's usually in the form of a couple of letters. And so maybe project 1, okay, for the PR1, all right, or maybe any other kind of notation. And it should, I mean, it is recommended that it should align with the code or the name of the project in the contract. And it could be just for a phase of the project. It doesn't have to be for the whole project, right? Second one, number 2, is the originator, all right? who created it. So that could be an abbreviation of the name of an organization or the person who is creating it, all right? Number 3, the volume number. So for example, if this is a model of the, I'll take the example I mentioned earlier, the West Wing in a hospital, for example, all right? So this would be volume number West Wing 1, okay, WW1, for example, okay? You have to put there which volume this model is related to, because there are other models which are being created at the same time for other volumes, other areas, okay? Number 4, the level, sorry, before I go on, the thing about volume number, in the BS, this is called zones, and in the PAS, this is called volumes, but they both mean the same thing. Okay, whether zone or volume, they both mean the same thing, so you don't get mixed up. Number 4 is the level number. So is this a model for the ground floor, first floor, mezzanine, whatever, okay? Number 5, what type of file is it? What does it show? Is it an IFC file? Okay, so is it an information exchange file, i.e., is it a 3-dimensional file, an M3? Is it a visualization file, FS? Is it a bill of quantities, BQ? Is it a structural calculation, SC? Okay, so it's good to write what this model is, before you open it, what does it contain, all right? Who to direct it to? Are you directing it to the structural people? Are you directing it to the MEP people to continue on with the coordination, to, you know, for the clash checking, avoidance and things like that? Okay, number 6 is the role. Who created that model? Is it the architect, civil engineer, client, interior designer, the landscape architect? Who is it? Who created it? If you cannot find who you are in this list, this is not an exhaustive list. You can always add to these as long as you share what they mean with the rest of the teams.
Can I just put a brief interjection there? In my view, two very important people are missed off that list. As Noha says, it's not going to be exhaustive, but is lawyer and insurer.
Definitely.
And they ought to be there, because as Noha is explaining, this standard doesn't just apply to graphic information. It applies to non-graphic information in the law and insurance, 2 very important types of information.
That's absolutely true. I mean, these are the ones mentioned in the BS, but mind you, when the BS came out, we hadn't started working with the BIM standards as we are now. And as Steve was saying, other roles have emerged of the same importance that need to be shared inside the common data environment. Yeah. That's true. Okay, I'll just do the rest of these and I'll take a couple of questions, all right? Okay, so I forgot to talk about the number 7. This is just the number of the model. Every file, sorry, not the model, the file. Every file has to have a number. So just to, you know, remove confusion, it can be a 4-digit number, and if it's number 1, you just put the rest of the zeros in front of it. Okay. Now the optional ones, the file status. The file status is extremely, extremely, extremely important, and Mervyn will talk a lot about that, and Steve and myself later on as well. Now, what the file status basically say is that it just tells you what the file is suitable for. What is it suitable to be used for? And I have here a table from the PAS 1192, which basically tells you the different statuses that you can, status, is that a word? Stati?
Stati, yeah.
Okay.
Statuses.
That can be written, that can be used in your naming convention. So, for example, if it is still a model that is work in progress, it is still being shared between the architectural designer and the structural designer, for example, it's not going to be signed off yet, then you can put S0. If it is something that is now suitable to be shared and given a sign-off, then you can put S1, for example. If it is issued for construction approval, S4. If it is issued for tender, if it's now ready for tender, D2, for example. And Mervyn will have something interesting actually to say about that, because there is a bit of controversy about the word issued here, but he will talk about it later next time. And if he doesn't, remind him, because he wanted to last time. Okay, so that's the status. Regarding the revision number 9, okay? So let's say that this model is the ductwork for the basement, for example, all right? And you're not, you don't want to change everything in it, but you have an important update that you want to include in the model. So you would issue it with another revision number, okay? So for example, MEP1 or P1 or whatever, okay? Plumbing, P1, okay, if it's plumbing. If you want to do a minor change after that, not a major change, then instead of issuing a completely new revision, you can issue a new version. So you can have it P1.1 or .2, sort of like the software thing, you know, like version 2.3 and 2.4 and all of this kind of thing. Okay. Okay, so I finished that part here. So before I go on to what the technical manager, technical BIM manager, or whatever role you want to call him, should do at the project setup, I'll just take a couple of questions here. Okay, what would foundation level be called? B1? Can't remember what it was in the. We're talking here. Basement or level below. I mean, again, this is something that you can decide on with your teams. This is not an exhaustive list, all right? You can call it whatever you wish if you do not wish to follow the list in the BS. I have not left the room, guys. I'm still here. I was just opening up another account on my laptop, and my laptop just lost charge, okay? So my laptop has left the room, not me. Sorry about that. We use this system now on our project-wise CDE jobs. Works well. Great to know. Need more letters in the alphabet. Probably would do, Tom. Have to manage. File naming convention number 5 and 6 are the abbreviations provided. Just examples or abbreviations with conventions. Number 5 and 6. Okay. So the types of files, as I am saying, Mina, this is not an exhaustive list. You can change, customize, just as long as you specify that specifically in any document that is attached to your BEP, and relay this information properly with the rest of your teams and within your team as well, as I'll be talking later. Steve, anything?
Just a small point to that. I agree with Noha. These are just guidance characters, sets of characters. I mean, for example, if you do MR and VS, model rendering and visualization, what's the difference? You know, even with something that's actually the thing about it appearing in the BS is it looks as though it's cast in stone, and it's not quite, because quite a few of these you've still got to decide what meaning it has within your particular project.
Yeah, exactly. From owner perspective, if the designer and contractor have their own standards, how can we force them to our standards? You can't force anyone if it's not designated or decided on right from the start, Mohammed. It has to be part of the EIR and the BEP. Without that, there's not going to be proper coordination between everybody. There has to be, the people have to talk all the time. They have to have that specified or written right from the start. But to force it later on or force your standards on them will require a lot of negotiations later on.
No, I have nothing to add to that.
Okay, where does it say that in the BS? Where does what say what in the BS? Sorry. Okay, sorry. We need the file number, the same. All right, I don't think there are any questions at the moment. Okay, what time is it? All right. All right, I'm not sure if I should go through this or leave it till next time. Okay, I'll start and we'll see where we go. Maybe I'll take 10 minutes going through this. All right. So there are a couple of issues which I've identified here which are important for a technical manager in order to make sure that they're applied at the project setup in particular. Now, this module is about BIM technical management, okay? Technical management of BIM. That's why I thought it would be important to talk about some technical issues which a manager should take care of during that phase, all right? With BIM, I mean, all right? So if we're talking about the first point, which is interdisciplinary coordination, all right? It's very important right from the start to communicate with your team internally what are the milestones for the delivery of the information. They should know exactly what should be delivered and when, what kind of documentation is required upon delivery, what kind of checks are supposed to be done, what kind of coordination, with whom, okay? So this should be something that should be talked about right from the start in a team meeting internally. Okay. Second thing, there should be meetings scheduled with other parties, with the tenders, the client, the contractor, the consultant. So not just internally, externally as well, to make sure that everybody is in alignment and understand and is in agreement with what's in the BEP, in the BEP, okay? For all you know, the BEP might not have been created with the agreement of everybody on board, so everybody should be in alignment with that. All right, it also would be very good and convenient if in team you decide on what LODs, levels of development, detail, definition, we will talk about the LOD thing later on, that are to be used on which models or on which parts of the models, because within the same model, you might have an object that is at an LOD, which is different from another object, and it does happen, okay? The whole model doesn't have to be at the same LOD. What kind of families are going to be created? How the work sharing is going to happen, so who is responsible for what volumes, how will the work sharing happen, at what times of the day, what times of the week, how will the coordination happen at the end of each week, for example, the volume division, as I said. But please be careful that as a manager, you must make sure that your team do not get overexcited and be willing to put extra details in beyond the LOD or beyond the details that are required from them. And this tends to happen a lot, especially in the designer phase, in the designer team, sorry. So please make sure that everyone knows to what level of detail or to what level of complexity they have to put inside the models, or in the information that's going to be added for the models or external to the models. Okay. Now, this is a question which I wanted to ask, but since we do not have time, then I will start with it next time, all right? It's a very interesting one, but it will take up 10 minutes at least. So please remind me if I do not to start with it next time. I'll just go on to the next things, all right? So this means, of course, that please make sure that you recap what I said today in order to start with those questions next time. Another thing which a manager should do during project setup is the geospatial coordination. And what does that ensure? The first point Steve have already talked about. So you should establish the origin point for the models and your orientation that's going to be used in order to link the models from the different disciplines together. Okay, to link the architecture with the structural, with the MEP, with the subcontracting as well. There should be a defined point of origin and defined orientation. Otherwise, when you come to federate the models together, you will find them on top of each other, away from each other, and you name it. And this has caused enormous amounts of problems previously. Okay, the geospatial location on Earth. While this might not be relevant internally, because you don't care where the project is, this should be put in the EIR, but actually it is important, because if you are doing any analytical approach, like for example, any sustainability studies, any shading studies, any energy analysis studies, the sun, the wind, the heat loss, all of these things, it's important to know where you are on Earth in order to see what are the different factors that affect your analysis. Okay, and again, this was mentioned by Steve. The units of measurement that are to be used must be unified in order to be able to federate the models properly. Okay, third thing which should be taken into account by the technical manager during project setup is the conventions, all right? So as a technical manager, you should ensure choice of the right templates, okay? So metric, imperial. Define and communicate to all the teams the naming conventions, as we were saying. How will you name the files, all right? Define the project phases. Sometimes a project is divided up into phases. So for example, you have refurbishment phases. You have a building that is developed up in stages. It's not all developed at the same time. So this must be communicated, the relationship between the models and the information that is coming out and the different phases. Now, those who are designers who use Revit or similar software will know that there is something called design options inside the software, inside Revit at least, okay? And this allows you to create more than design option, I mean, obviously, for a particular space, which might be aligned to different phases in the project lifecycle. So again, this is important to identify what the different phases are of the project, because they might be aligned with different options inside the software, as you can see. Okay, now this is one that is missed out a lot. The reference planes and the axes and what they align to. Something as simple as aligning a wall to the center of the axis or to the left or to the exterior. Is the cladding outside the center line or not? All of these things which appear to be you know, easy and are not taken into consideration sometimes can cause huge confusion later on. They can cause confusion with the schedules that are created, the bill of quantities, the sizes of the rooms, the uses and the functions, even the structural elements aligning with the walls, the MEP appearing part inside the wall and part outside, or problems using clash detection. So it's very important to know or align with your team exactly where the axes and the reference planes are. I think I've almost finished here. Okay. So in terms of data transfer, technical issues of data transfer, regardless of the naming of the files, you should also look into the folder structuring. And I believe there's something in the BS about the folder structuring as well. Yeah. You should have this very, very clear. How is that decided on or divided up inside your servers? What are the software versions that everybody's using? Okay, make sure that everybody's updated with that. Okay, now this is a very important one. How are you going to exchange the data? Are you going to use FTP sites? Are you going to use cloud? Are you going to use an intranet internally between the teams in the one organization? This should be decided on and figured out right from the start as well within the team internally. And this one is also very important. If you have large models, I don't know if you noticed or not, but one of the requirements in the EIR was deciding the maximum size of files to be exchanged. So if you have to split up large models, first of all, what is the maximum size? How will you split it up? If you split it up, how does that go with the work sharing, if you are work sharing amongst the teams? What kind of links are needed? Okay, all of this should be decided on right from the start. The technical manager should do that with their team. And finally, here, as a technical manager, in preparation for the tenders and bids, you should decide together how the technical information, technical drawings, graphical and non-graphical data that you are producing will affect the tender or bid that you are about to go into. What are the documents that are required to be included? And again, there's a question here, which I wanted to ask, but I won't today. I'll ask both questions next time. And that's really about it for me today, guys. So These are the 5 categories which I have written here that are essential to be managed by a technical manager when using or when creating BIM projects. So if have any questions, guys, we're 5 minutes over time, but okay. Sorry. What is the LOD required in the design stage? It depends what design you're talking about, Mohammed. So the architectural might be at level 200, maybe 300. The structural is usually higher, maybe 300, 350. The design stage of the fabricators or the manufacturers would probably be at 400, 500, and same thing for the design of the shop drawings of the contractor, again 400 or more. Laurent, can we have both a BIM manager and a project manager on the same project? Great question, and I won't answer it now. As you will notice later, we will dedicate a whole session on that, on the roles and responsibilities. For now, what I would like you to do, if you can, is to read that section in the PAS. Okay, there is a whole section about the different roles and how they relate to each other. But a short answer to your question, yes, you can have both. Or they can both be the same person, but we will talk about that later on. It depends on how you create the project, how big the project is, but we'll talk about it later. What is the difference between CR, clash rendition, against M3, three-dimensional model? Well, the clash rendition would have the clashes inside it, but the three-dimensional model probably won't, Andy. I'm not sure if I missed any questions previous to that. From the owner perspective, if, oh no, we did that, I think. What is the LOD? We answered that. Okay, are not these two roles clashing? Okay, that's in answer to your question, Laurent. Again, this all depends on what exactly each person is written to be doing in the BEP. That's why it has to be a requirement by the client that he's requesting for. If he wants both, and he would require both. But in the BEP, the absolute detailed responsibilities of each one of them would be written specifically and to very fine detail in the BEP, okay? So that they don't clash, exactly as you're saying, they shouldn't clash. So it has to be specified in the BEP. We usually struggle just to get a postcode. Oh, brilliant, Tom. I'd expect. I remember we had. I think it was Martin who said something like that last year. I'd expect to have one BIM manager working with multiple PMs, possibly, Alistair. It depends on how you divide it up or decide on it. A BIM manager working on various projects or more than one PM on a project. All of these are possible. And we will see lectures come in when we have David Miller come in. He will talk to you about how they were acting as an architectural agency, both as the architectural designer and as the BIM manager at the same time. But they were not the project manager, or were they? I can't remember. But he will talk about that later on, and you'll get other examples. Just like you should have a CAD manager supporting several projects, you should have a BIM manager who should work in a similar way. Okay. One BIM manager working on several. Okay. Before we move on from that issue, Laurent, the PAS specifies the recommended roles and responsibilities of each person on the teams. But because a project varies in size and in structure, again, it does not have to be exactly like what's written in the PAS. It can be varied. The PAS is there to give a good reference for people to use so that they don't clash in their roles and responsibilities, and also so that nothing is forgotten. Because if you look at the PAS, you will find a few roles which are emerging or could be used that have not been used before. But again, we'll talk about that later. What is the type of data I have to get from the FM to embed in the design stage? We will talk a lot about FM later on. Steve, do you want to?
And Roy's coming back in.
Yeah. We have Roy Evans coming in, who will be talking about government soft landings and requirements for FM and post-occupancy evaluations. And he will be able to talk about the requirements from FM back into the design stage. So Mohammed, please remember your question. When he comes, please ask it then. Why shall the design team remove information for tenders? It is a possibility that this is asked for. I'm not saying that it should be, but just in case, this has been specified in the past as one of the things which should be included if needed. The model file size is the downfall of BIM. Yeah, too big sometimes. People model till their PC crashes, exactly, and that's why you have to have a certain size that you don't overdo.
Darren sat there all this time.
5 minutes over. You have done very well today. Thank you, Darren. We were waiting for that certificate. Okay, Chris, have a BIM prequel bid response to complete. Okay, good luck with that. Okay, so this is basically our cue to go. Everybody's very.
When Darren said it's
yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much, and see you all next Tuesday. And if you have any questions, just send them over. And please read the project brief, and don't be frightened. It's not as scary as it will seem. Actually, it's pretty easy. The other people in the cohort 2 will tell you that. If someone dares say anything different. Okay, I'll see you next week, guys.
Bye.
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Have a good weekend.
Sure, if I'm still. Okay. I think I've closed it. Yeah.
Is that?
No, nothing else I can do to close it more than that.
Is that the first time it's been used, Tip Chat?
No, we used it last time. Yeah, with Mervyn.
With Mervyn.
Mm.
So what's happening to Breeze then?
Don't ask me, Steve. Okay, the thing is, we crashed the server with our recordings, and till now they haven't upgraded it. And every single time I ask, the upgrade has failed. They're still doing it again. The upgrade has failed. Still doing it again. And the students are getting annoyed. I mean, I just received an email from Tanushka now. She's furious about the way this is happening. And Anushka is second year. So she's already seen a whole year of smooth operations. Yeah. What about the others who just joined in? I mean, I'm really upset because this is not how this should be. To have problems in the first 2 weeks.
Is it in Leonard's ballpark?
No. It's
the
Moodle guys, and it's not even them, because they got the Microsoft guys in to do the upgrading, and they haven't done it up till now. They haven't succeeded in doing it. So we're just basically pleading and nagging, and it's just unbelievable.
So there could be other schools and departments who've run out of space as well on Breeze, presumably, or is it just us? I can hear you.
Okay.
I know where you are.
Okay, guys, if you can hear us, sorry about that.
I've not said anything like
slanderous. No.
Not yet, anyway. About these two cohorts.
What's today? Is today the 14th? No.
17th.
Okay, I just want to copy and paste this. Today's. Second, right? We'll discuss the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
guys, that's enough. We won't talk about anything else in front of you. Sorry, guys, about the whole breeze thing. Honestly, we're trying our best to get it. This is the first time that this has happened in 2 years, but I've been promised that it will be resolved over the weekend. Okay, so we're trying our best with that, and hopefully we'll be back to normal again.